horror as a genre has always fascinated me because my greatest fear as a small child growing up was the loss of civility, the loss of civilization when the evil comes out of man. Maybe it was because I'm Jewish and I was raised a Jew. I had a Jewish education, and every year I met people that were interned in concentration camps and heard their stories. And the idea that when you're a little kid, the thing that you can't, I think that was really, it was hardest for me to wrap my head around growing up, was that one day your friends and neighbors, people that lived in Germany for a long time, one group of people decided that this other group of people was no longer human, that they were lesser. Now, then it's interesting because some people got this the other way around. Then in like the fourth grade, when I was 10 years old, what added to that horror was when Roots was a thing and the TV miniseries was out. I was 10 years old. It was the fourth grade. And Alex Haley's book Roots was a big deal. And learning that Americans, we used to think that there was a group of people that were lesser, that were animals. And I always found that I couldn't quite come to grips with that as a kid. And I think that was the thing that, to this day, it scares me the most, the loss of civility. We see it all the time. And I never thought I would live in a world where still, as a young boy going to Sunday school, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, now that I'm, in the fifth decade of my life, there's more people on Earth that think Jews are subhuman than maybe ever before, and no one's bashful about talking about it either. And it truly is an interesting state of affairs. But again, it just goes to show you that the horror genre is steeped in the evils that men do. In terms of science fiction, it's a genre of possibility. Sure, you've got your dystopian worlds and all of that, but for me, when I first got into science fiction, it was looking to the future. It was looking what humanity could become. And it was inherently sort of optimistic because it said we had a future and we were going places. Whereas horror really can be broken down into two. To me, there are two tracks of horror. There is the idea of the fear of dying and what's going to happen to you after you die. You're going to die, and the pain of death, the horror of death. And then the flip side of that is the horror of continuing to live. So on one hand, horror will take you to death, and you can fear death and all of that because it's the great unknown. Or you don't die, and you have to stay alive in whatever horror you're stuck in. Whether it's Nazi Germany, whether the demons have conquered the earth, whether vampires have taken over, whether you've been made part of the undead and you have to live forever as one of the undead. You can never see the sun in the sky. You have to drink blood the rest of your life. So you're either going to die, that's one hand, or you're going to go and on living in whatever situation you're in. So that to me was horror, whereas science fiction inherently to me was about human life being better or at least more interesting. So that's kind of where I was at. But I loved horror because the thing about horror was it was much more as they said on Star Trek in Return of the Archons, it was much more of the body. And one of the things that horror taught me when I was young, to this day I still think about it, is that to be born is to die. So let's take the science fiction elements out of there. That's inherently horrific. And our life is one of, accelerated decrepitude, as Pris said in Blade Runner. That's where we're going. We're going into the dark tunnel of non-existence in a slow, inexorable march to the end of our life. And if we live to a ripe old age, that means none of our body doesn't work anymore. We can't see, we can't hear, we can't fuck. Nothing is good. But we continue to go on until the light finally goes out. So the existence of humanity lends itself more to, I think, horror than it does to science fiction. So it behooved me to be fans of both. So, and now that I've reached a point in my own life where the science fiction aspects are kind of receding in the rear view and the horror elements are looming large so to speak. I still love both genres, but they're kind of trading off. And although who are we kidding? I've loved horror since I was a kid. But the thing was, I always felt that there was something, when you hear Roy Batty say, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe." That's profound. I get it. But to me, the more horror can have more profundity in it than science fiction can. It's harder to make people believe in that profundity because horror has so many more overt, fantastical elements. The supernatural, undead coming back to life, patchwork men being built by mad scientists that are revived by lightning. I mean, there's all this whimsical, crazy stuff. So there's a lot of really interesting horror. I do think, though, if you look at Sinners, and you look at Weapons, and you look at Final Destination Bloodline, and you look at The Conjuring Last Rites, I think all of those movies are pretty safe. They're pretty safe. They are not delving into transgressive human horror like I like a lot. They're safe. They are horror for everybody. And the real question that I have for you tonight, for all of you, pondering this, is that enough? Is that enough? And I feel I have not seen or experienced a lot of transgressive horror. Now remember, I don't just mean movies that are beyond the pale, like a Serbian film. Yes, that's transgressive, but and I understand the director, it's making a comment on the Balkans War. You can say what you want, bruh. But that film, it was like, let's sit around and think about the most disgusting. And I appreciate that, and I own it, uncut, I do. But the thing is, I want my transgressive horror with a huge dollop of philosophy. I remember when we were making Hills Run Red in Bulgaria, Dave was getting to make a slat. Dave Parker, the director, of course, my friend Dave. He was getting to make this great slasher character that he'd created, and I was much more interested in Wilson Wyler Kincannon, the filmmaker. And he said to me once, he kind of was exasperated with me, and he said, "Enough of your philosophy. What's with the philosophy?" And even one of the characters in the movie says, "Get to the kill." I always thought that was kind of funny. But for me, I go back to Videodrome, that woman that has the hots for Max Wren, she's talking about why you shouldn't look for Videodrome. And I always say this, again, my philosophy of all this stuff was shaped by movies that came out in 1983. But when she says to Max, don't go looking for Videodrome. Videodrome is dangerous because, say it with me now, it has a philosophy. And the Marquis de Sade had a philosophy. The filmmaker who was making the movie within a movie in a Serbian film, he had a philosophy. Philosophy is where horror gets really good. When you think about, we're now getting, what are we getting? American Crime Story, whatever. We're going to get the Ed Gein story again in a different format, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, to me, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has lost none of its power because, to me, Texas Chainsaw is, again, one of the great examples of, I would say, perfect, extreme, transgressive horror, in the sense that you now have human beings that are completely, they've reached the point where they're almost animalistic, in the sense that they see all other human beings as dinner, as meat, and there is no empathy, and there is nothing will save you if you run afoul of these people. Leatherface and his family, if you run afoul of them, unless you can escape somehow, it truly is, I mean, hell to me has always been metaphoric, but to run across Leatherface and his family is the ultimate example of going to hell, being doomed for eternity. You're going to die. There's no way out. There's no reasoning. There's no... and they're human beings. And they're going to kill you and eat you without remorse. They're not going to think about you again. They're going to turn your bones into lamps and chairs and mirrors, whatever the hell they do with your bones, and they're going to eat the rest of you. Like, I was never really interested in slasher movies. Like, I really liked Halloween because I liked the technique of it. And Halloween had a lot to say about suburbia. And there's this great conversation that the teacher's having about fate. And I always remember when I first got Halloween and watched it many, many, many times, I always loved that because, like, John Carpenter figured out a way to get a little philosophical in Halloween. And the fact that it's basically a bloodless movie. But you've got some sex in it. The idea that teenagers are being punished for sex, I always thought that was an oversimplification. And then when we got a movie like It Follows, a movie I didn't love when I first saw it, I like it more now, especially after getting the second sight disc. But when you watch It Follows, I thought I was so in on that movie. And I think It Follows has the second greatest, it's not really a jump scare, but it's there's a moment one of the followers just comes through a door. And there's something about it that is it's one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. It's so well done. But the problem with It Follows is, it talked about, like, you have to have sex to get this curse or whatever it is, but they don't really get into the sex part of it. It's not sexy. You understand what's going on, but it's like it shies away from the sex. And the horror is really, really interesting until you realize halfway through the movie you don't know what it is. It's what I used to call an impossible premise. Like shows like Lost have an impossible premise. My beloved horrible gobbledygook filled Manifest, impossible premise. You've got a great pilot. You don't know where it's going. You're never going to figure out where it's going, and you're only left to at the end. It's got to be purgatory, and of course the people in Manifest have to land exactly when they were supposed to, and everything they went through. It's like, oh my God, none of it really happened, or blah blah blah, or whatever. It Follows had an impossible premise for a movie. Normally you get it's a series, but it's a movie that they can never explain it. They don't know what it is. It was really creepy, and I think They Follow is the next one, the sequel that's coming out. Maybe they'll know, maybe they'll figure it out. But that was the thing. I was watching It Follows. I saw it in the theater. I saw it in the ArcLight, and I'm watching it on a Saturday with my friend Dave Hargrove. And we're watching this movie, and we both realized kind of at the same time, it really jumps the shark at this moment in this boathouse when it's like, oh, they really don't know what's going on, and they have no idea what's going on. And that bummed me out. Because the whole thing is when you want to get to that revelation and find out what was happening. Are we going to get to that revelation? Is it going to work? And when you realize that the filmmakers don't know what it is, well, then you're like, oh, well, we have an idea. Yeah, but then you start breaking your rules. Then all of a sudden things start to change and there's a physicality in the real world. Bum me out. Still like It Follows, but, what can you expect? Not everything can be The Exorcist. And I think one of the great things about horror movies is, especially from other countries, is you get a real sense of how those countries are different from the United States. And that's one of the things I've always loved about international horror. And that's why watching a movie like, well, Where Evil Lurks, or if you haven't seen it, The Coffee Table. I gotta file this actually. By the way, if you don't know anything about The Coffee Table, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but going cold for do it for the Bobster and the Deets. But that's what I love about international horror is depending on where it comes from, its specificity makes it really interesting. Different religious views, different review. Like in Asian culture, they know your ancestors are looking at you, and you can't get rid of a curse, no matter how hard you try. It doesn't go away. Or they're the differences in, look at movies like The Wailing and Where Evil Lurks and look at how they deal with possession. Great stuff. And I love it. I love it. And that's what I love about horror. I love it so much.